It's Thursday, January 9th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. It's playoff. We're talking playoff ball now at this point. And joining me to do just that is Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, my friend. Just excited for the playoffs. Got a lot of interesting storylines. Obviously, I want to give out our thoughts to everybody in the Southern California area with the wildfires going on. We hope everybody is safe. But this is one of the best weekends of the year. We have 6 games. This is the last 6-game slate. There's games on Saturday, games on Sunday. There's a game on Monday. Not sure where that game will be played. So basically, you throw in the college games. I mean, it's just a time to settle on the couch. You do not want to make plans this week. There's going to be a lot of football going on.
So much football going on. Yeah, I echo Scott's thoughts as well with everybody in the Los Angeles area. You know, obviously lived there for almost 10 years of my life. My wife's family's still out there. So have a lot of friends, family that have, I know a few folks that have lost their homes, and I know plenty more who have been affected by this in some way. So yeah, our thoughts are obviously with everybody there, and it's going to come up over the course of the show because we have 2 LA teams playing here. We'll get to the Rams game that might end up being impacted by this as well. So just kind of hanging over everything right now. So I agree with Scott. Yeah, thoughts to those folks as well, and hopefully we can, come out of this in some way. So with that being said, rough transition to football here, where we have, like Scott said, so many games to get into here. And our preview shows for the postseason are pretty much going to follow this same exact format, where in the first 2 segments, just good old-fashioned previews. We're just going to talk through the games. We're going to talk through, hey, when this team has the ball, what do we expect? And then in the final segment, we're going to do something similar to what we did during the regular season with Nate on the Fantasy Film Room. We'll prop it up here. We're going to share our favorite props for the weekend to consider. I'll give 2, Scott will give 2, and we'll keep it moving. So let's waste no more time here. Let's get into the first game we have on the slate, which is the Saturday game. Chargers -3 at the Houston Texans. We have a 42.5 point total in this game, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. Let's start, Scott, when the Chargers have the ball. What do we expect from the Jim Harbaugh-led operation?
Yeah, not surprised. This is the lowest total of the 6 games. And even though we think of Harbaugh and Greg Roman, you can run the ball, right? Chargers are just 21st in rushing DVOA. So they've tried to run the ball. I realized that Dobbins didn't play for about half the schedule, and he's their best back. But I've seen them be more proactive in the passing game as the second half has worn on. And really, Ladd McConkey just kind of taken over. 58 targets his last 7 games. He's averaged 88 yards receiving in his last 10 games. So even though the Houston defense doesn't have an obvious weakness, 3rd in DVOA, and they're good against the run, good against the pass, I think they're 4th in sacks overall. I do think the Chargers, if they're going to move the ball, McConkey has to be key. And I think this is a game where Herbert throws 30 or more passes.
I agree with you. Yeah, and I think this passing game has really opened up here in LA over the course of the season. They've gotten so many good contributions from different players. Houston, by the way, it's also worth noting, has injuries in the secondary too. Jalen Petrie, slot corner Jimmy Ward, they've missed time in the late portion of the season. Ladd McConkey certainly should be in a good spot there, but he's not the only guy that's contributing in this passing game, Scott. 13 receptions for Quentin Johnston in the final game of the season, and I think that will obviously get painted as a big fluke here. But shoot, like he's made contributions at times all year. He's had his obviously rough moments. He's not a perfect player, but they've gotten contributions from him. Even like Darius Davis right now, Scott, has stepping up in like I don't want to call it pure gadgety type of ways. He's made some real deal receiver plays, but he's been sort of the pre-snap motion eye candy, which has allowed them to do, I think, more real deal wide receiver stuff with Ladd McConkey. So, there's a lot to like in this Chargers passing game right now. And I agree with you. I do expect Herbert to throw the ball 30 plus times in this game.
And, Quentin Johnston's funny. I mean, he was mostly a touchdown deodorant guy, and then 13 for 186 on 14 targets in that final game. And I know it wasn't, a lot of people don't use week 18 for fantasy for very good reasons, but he also had an 8 target and a 10 target game in December. So he's become more of a proactive guy in this passing game too. But I really think that if the Chargers are going to win, Ladd McConkey needs to be around 100 yards in this game, and I think he will be.
I think he will be too. He's certainly somebody that I would like from a prop betting perspective. He's not one of my props later on, but he should have a good matchup too, because typically you think about the way the Texans play defense, they've at times, leaned into some real heavy man coverage stuff, but on the whole, they are a rather zone heavy defense, which is obviously, I think, good for a guy like Ladd McConkey, who can rip open some of those zones in the middle of the field. But also you have to consider too, Derek Stingley, their top perimeter corner, who is a guy that will man up against number one receivers. He is mostly a player who plays on the outside. He does not travel into the slot at all. So Ladd McConkey can win inside outside, but he really has a good matchup advantage there. One thing I'm definitely watching in this game from a Chargers side of things is just how the pass protection holds up. Because if you got to give the Texans credit, like we'll get to their offense here in a second and the many, many issues haunting that unit. The reason that they're in this game, besides the fact that the division is kind of also ran, is that their defense is very, very good. And particularly their pass rush has been an issue for teams all season. They're one of the top 2 pressure rate teams in the NFL. They actually stop the run really well too. But that's a matchup that I'm watching, is that Chargers offensive line. Rashawn Slater probably going to play in this game, but he's dealing with an injury. But mostly on the interior, that's been an issue all season. When Herbert in this passing game has struggled, it's because teams have been able to pressure them on the interior. Houston runs a lot of like games up front. They can, which is ironic because they don't know how to pick up a stunt to save their life on the other side, but they can blitz and stunt pretty well on the other side of it. If they get some of those edge rushers like Danielle Hunter or Will Anderson kind of ripping up through the interior, then we could have some issues there with this Chargers offensive line.
A little more reason to get McConkey going, because those quickly defined throws in the slot won't force Herbert to hold on to the ball that long.
Yeah, totally agree. McConkey is a guy in drafts next year. Where do you think he's going to end up going? And where would you take him?
Perfect third round pick.
I wonder if he ends up getting into the second round, especially like big couple postseason moments here, particularly this Texans team. I think he could end up being, he could end up going pretty high in drafts. And I love him, man. I think he's a great player. And I think the ceiling on him is not defined just by what he did in his rookie season.
Yeah, just what a great rookie class, right? I mean, we're going to have so many arguments about Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, and McConkey came on. Jalen McMillan was a touchdown guy late in the season. Obviously, Marvin Harrison and Rome Odunze didn't have their best seasons, but they're talented guys. It's the Patriots got Jalen Polk, but we move on.
Did you see Adam Harstead put out his from Football Guys, great writer over at Football Guys? He puts out a rookie model every season, and I believe Jalen Polk had the worst season in his rookie season in his model's history, just narrowly beating out former Eagles great JJ Arcega-Whiteside for the worst rookie season in his model's history.
Wow, it just makes me even more depressed. The Patriots, their great receivers were falling out of the sky, and I think Baker had 1 catch in the final game of the season. But we digress. New England's not in the playoffs. At least they're going to have a new coach.
At least they are going to have a new coach. Man, yeah, just awful with the Polk stuff. Every single week, there's some like worst stat that you could possibly find. But yeah, no, I do think the Chargers do have a pretty nice advantage in the passing game. I don't know if they have an advantage in the run game, and hope this is going to take a little bit of, I'm not going to call it like a get out of their typical type, because they have done well in the pass game, but you just hope that they don't get too over committed to the run game, because I don't think they necessarily have an advantage from that part of the dynamic, which I think, by the way, perfectly transitions us to the other side of this here, which is the Houston Texans, who have maybe been a little bit too stubborn in their run pass ways on offense. But man, the Chargers defense has been solid at times this year, and they show a lot of light boxes pre-snap. And I think Bobby Slowick and that Texans coaching staff is going to see those light boxes, and they're going to be incentivized to run into them. That's pretty problematic in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Houston has to try to run the ball here. I mean, the Chargers had the best YPA allowed of the AFC teams, and they gave up 4.7 yards on the ground per carry. Texans, man, the offensive line has not played well. Joe Mixon had a productive year despite that. And CJ Stroud just backsliding, right? I mean, he takes 14 more sacks this year. He throws twice as many picks. It didn't hurt that all of his receivers were hurt at different points of the year. And obviously 2 of them are out now. Nico Collins is a god, but he missed about 2 months of the season. So I think this is a game where Mixon, even if it doesn't go anywhere, although I do think you can't run on the Chargers, as I said, 4.7 allowed, but Mixon's going to get 20 plus carries in this game, because I feel like they look at this game and say, we have to win this game on defense. And we have to win this game by hiding CJ Stroud. Of course, they're going to take downfield shots. Nico Collins, he's their playmaker. There'll be some play action. But Collins, I'm sorry, Stroud, when your offensive line plays poorly and you start to lose your confidence in your pocket awareness and your pocket presence, that just, it snowballs, right? It just compounds. And I feel like you need to almost reboot Stroud at the end of the season. It's so crazy that last year the story was, oh man, the Panthers whiffed on Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. What a right answer he was. And then year 2, Stroud goes backwards and Young makes strides. I don't really know what to do with Young's fast finish. He was fantastic in week 18 with the 5 touchdowns, but I never thought we'd have like a Young Stroud conversation again. I thought that was pretty much decided, even understanding. We've been in this a long time, Matt. We know one season is just one season from a young player. You don't want to decide these guys are definitely this or definitely that, but I thought we were done with that. And now I feel like we have to have that discussion again.
And you know what? I think it comes right back to the offensive line, too, because I would argue that the Texans are the most underperforming offensive line based on expectations in the preseason. And I think that the Panthers were maybe the 32nd offensive line last year, and they're like a top 10 unit this season. They've gotten great play out of Robert Hunt, who is a free agent signing, Damian Lewis. They've actually found some answers at center despite dealing with injuries there. Nice little season from Taylor Moton and Ike Ekwonu, who at times looked like unplayable in Carolina. He was solid this year. Like, you didn't really notice him as a big problem. And those guys on the interior, like almost the exact opposite of what I talked about with the Chargers. On the interior, they're really strong there, which has given Bryce Young these like big pockets to step up and readjust. Whereas like you look at CJ Stroud, that guy never has a pocket to like step up and readjust. And he's typically, when he's had to create plays out of structure, it's been booting out, and this Chargers defense is interesting because, I think Jesse Minter's done a great job with this unit overall. They've got a lot of young players in the secondary playing really well with zone coverage. But, Nico Collins, of course, 5th in the NFL in first downs per route run against zone coverage. He's 4th in the NFL in yards per route run against zone coverage. He's also very good against man coverage as well. He's a do-it-all receiver. But, honestly, Scott, if the Texans are going to win this game, I think it has to be a big Nico Collins game, because who else is stepping up here? Like, Joe Mixon sputtered to the end of the season. He had a nice fantasy season overall, but he sputtered to the end. The run game also was never efficient, even when Mixon was putting up fantasy numbers. So I feel like this has to be a big Stroud to Nico Collins game. And I still have confidence in Stroud as like a quarterback who can win in big games. I think it's a lot of the environmental issues that we've talked about that have dragged down his second season.
Do you see a second pitch in this passing game? I mean, who would be the player when they're not going to Collins? Who are they going to prioritize? Where can they win downfield?
I mean, no, I don't really see that guy, because I think Mechie's like a acceptable slot receiver. Robert Woods is, on his last legs at this point. And Xavier Hutchinson's not a needle mover either. And even Hutchinson, I think, was a guy that profiled coming into the league as like not a outside X receiver or anything like that. He kind of profiled as more of like an Alan Lazard type of player, does some blocking work, kind of a dirty work player, but you don't want to. How many times have we complained about Alan Lazard playing too many snaps for the Packers and then obviously the Jets? Like, I think that Hutchinson is kind of in that mold as well.
I had hoped when Mechie had that game against the Lions on the Sunday night, I had hoped that maybe this was a here we go moment for Mechie, and I was a little bit disappointed. I thought he'd do more. I know he had 5 catches in the Baltimore game, but I thought maybe he would do more in December just out of necessity. As you said, Woods is basically putting out in the 18th hole at this point. Hutchinson's somebody they can't trust. Dalton Schultz had a disappointing year. Mixon isn't really explosive in the pass game either. That's another thing. If they had somebody who they could unleash with screens, or even like some of these running backs are great route runners, as you break all that stuff down. Mixon isn't really that player anymore. He's just more of a gets what's blocked and maybe an extra yard. I mean, I respect what he's done with the poor run blocking they've had, but it's not like you can ask Joe Mixon to win on the perimeter. So yeah, Nico's going to have double, even though I do think it'll be a run heavy approach. Nico's going to have 8 to 12 targets in this game.
Yeah, the over under on his catches is 6.5 at plus 100. Like, I think he better catch 7 balls. If he doesn't catch 7 balls, like, the Texans are not winning this game. So before we move on in this one, who do you think wins this game?
Give me the Chargers, and also just a nod to Andy Dalton and Matt Schaub, who always played in this early window game, the Shakey's Pizza game. It's always a Bengals or a Texans game, so this feels like comfort food for me. But those Andy Dalton teams always lost in round 1. A lot of the Schaub teams did too. So give me the Chargers by, I don't know, a touchdown or so.
Isn't it funny that we're talking about this game as kind of like a low scoring, maybe not that exciting, and I think a lot of that has to do with where the Texans are, and just the Chargers are ahead of schedule. They're not dripping with a bunch of talent at this point. This was supposed to be a reset year roster wise. It is a reset year roster wise. And we went from Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, a lot of Austin Eckler, a lot of like the old guard is not here, at least offensively. Defensively, they kept guys around, but this is still, I mean, you're talking about freaking Andy Dalton and Matt Schaub, and this is Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud coming off of a great rookie season. And we're still kind of like, maybe the lowest scoring game on the slate, the whole deal. Quarterback wise though, this is a much juicier matchup, I think, maybe than we give it credit for.
Yeah. And as a fan, I just think the Chargers have such a better chance to, if all the form holds in the other AFC games, that it would be this game would go to Kansas City. And I think the Chargers wouldn't be afraid of that game. Kansas City, of course, has lived vicariously. They've been the cat with the 9 lives all season. But I think the Chargers could go in and scare Kansas City. I'm afraid if Houston went to Kansas City, it would just be a blowout. Yeah.
It just Texans, they're going to be an interesting team to talk about if they do lose this game, or if they lose this game in particular. Maybe if they win a playoff game like they, just like they did last year, it still doesn't represent progress, but maybe they can keep telling themselves like, all right, we're going in the right direction. But they're going to be an interesting team to do kind of like the season retrospective on, and kind of the moratorium and things like that.
And man, did the buzz on Bobby Slowick just really come down, right? I mean, he was almost right next to Ben Johnson a year ago. It felt like, oh yeah, this guy's going to be a head coach someday. And then this year, people are like, what is Bobby Slowick doing?
It's a great point. Things change quickly. I'm also with Scott. I will take the Chargers -3 in this game as well. Okay, let's move on to the next game here. This one, we got Steelers at Ravens. Ravens are 9.5-point home favorites, 43.5-point total in this one. Let's talk about when the Steelers have the ball, Scott. This is the Amazon Prime game, by the way, the second game on Saturday. That'll be interesting. Hopefully you got your Amazon Prime account ready to go to watch this game. Steelers offense, Scott, not a good finish to the season. Talk about sputtering to the end of the campaign. That has absolutely been the Steelers offense. What do we need to see from them when they have the ball against the Ravens defense that I will, add has been a top 5 unit in the back half of the year?
Yeah. We know Pittsburgh, who has dominated this series until the last meeting when Baltimore said enough of this stuff, we're the better team. But for about 4 or 5 years, the Steelers would find a way to make this the 18-16 game, the ugly game. And that's been even when the Steelers were winning this year. I mean, 29th in touchdown rate in the red zone. Chris Boswell would he kick like 78 field goals. I mean, I think 41, I think was the actual number, which is an enormous number for a kicker. Russell Wilson lost his mojo. Pickens was hurt. Then he came back and you didn't even know he was on the field those last couple of games. So the Steelers want to ugly it up. They want to shorten the game. This is a game where I think they want Harris to probably get maybe around 20 carries. They probably want Warren to have double-digit touches. Russ will take some shot plays to Pickens, but he's not going to throw the ball a lot. Freiermuth has become a more important part of their offense the last few weeks, but they have to ugly the game up. They have to shorten it. They have to give Wilson easy reads. They don't want. It's just sad that Russell Wilson can't run the way he used to, right? It's the era of a mobile quarterback, and so many teams that are going to go deep in the playoffs are going to do it on the legs of their quarterback, and Wilson just isn't that guy anymore. And of course, he's short, so he needs to get out of the pocket sometimes just to see where the throw is. This is Mike Tomlin's right now trying to find a way to how can we get a scorigami, right? How can we get to a score the NFL has never seen before, right? And just keep the ball away from the Ravens. That's their MO, and they probably need to turn over the Ravens a couple times to win. I would just trust Tomlin in these spots. I think they've run out of answers. I think Mike Tomlin had a lot of aces up his sleeve, a lot of rabbits in the hat, and right now he's shaking the hat and no rabbits falling out.
Yeah, I mean, you said George Pickens, you didn't notice him out there. You definitely noticed him, I think, in week 18, with several drop passes. What do you have? 7 targets, 1 catch, or 6 targets, 1 catch. Definitely at least 1 drop. He's like egging on the fans, like telling them to come down here. I mean, it was as usual, if George Pickens has an unproductive game, it's always eventful in some way, Scott.
It's on brand.
Extremely on brand. And it's very similar to like what we just said with Nico Collins, but maybe even more so. Like, I think if Pittsburgh is going to upset Baltimore in this game, it has to be a big George Pickens game. But man, I just don't feel very confident in that, not just because of how Pickens has ended the season. And like Pickens has these weird stretches where, I mean, at different times this year, he was like running fewer routes than Van Jefferson. We were talking about effort on routes and things like that. And then he comes and has this awesome stretch with Russell Wilson when he first comes. Like George Pickens still leads the NFL in like yards per route run on explosive plays this year. He's been a great receiver in different pockets of the season. We're just in one of those dry spells, but that could easily flip around at any moment. The problem is, Scott, part of the reason that the Ravens defense has taken off in the second half of the season here is they've made some personnel changes. Like they get Marcus Williams out of there, they get Eddie Jackson out of there, Kyle Hamilton's playing more safety, and first round cornerback Nate Wiggins, who is like super skinny but very explosive, very athletic. He's played great football on the outside there, and I don't know if I give him the advantage because, Pickens is a physical player at the catch point when he wants to turn it on, but I'd give him kind of the edge right now based on the way Pickens is playing in that one-on-one matchup.
Yeah, I would too. For a second, I thought Hamilton got hurt in the Week 18 game, and I'm like, oh no, that's the last thing they need is Kyle Hamilton to break his arm or something. He's played so well, as you mentioned, since the position change. And also the pass rush. What makes the secondary look good when the pass rush plays well? They're second in the league in sacks. And if there's a prop of Russell Wilson like getting strip sacked in this game, I would bet it right now because I just see now what Pittsburgh really should do. What do you do with a team with a good pass rush, right? How do you slow it down? You want to get involved in the screen game. This is a game where Jaylen Warren, and I thought he was a really good prop last week for his receiving yardage. He didn't hit it. I don't think he came close to it, but
he didn't catch a pass last week.
They need Jaylen Warren involved in the passing game. Arthur Smith, it's a big miss, and I realize, we never really know if we can trust Arthur Smith or not, but he needs to find two things have to happen for Pittsburgh to win. He needs a couple of explosive plays from Pickens, and I think he needs some screen game or some receiving work game coming from Jaylen Warren, something they did not do last week in a game that they took seriously.
Yeah, they need to do a lot of what they did in the chunk of the season when this was working with Russell. And I think we're about run out of. Frankly, I just think we've run out of rope here with the Russell Wilson stuff. I think this is probably coming back to the pack at this point. I think that Pittsburgh maybe they can franchise tag him, but I don't think they can just walk in and have him be the clear cut. We're going to start him for 17 games next season. Although the Steelers are the Steelers, they might end up doing that anyways. But if they're gonna put together a game plan to win this game, they have to stretch out the field with George Pickens, Mike Williams, these guys running these deeper routes. And I agree with you, even if it's not screens, like clear designed checkdowns, like Russell, you don't like that post snap, pre snap look with George Pickens or one of these guys in a one-on-one situation on the outside. Check it down to Jaylen Warren quickly, and he can make plays. I do think it was a miss, frankly, in Week 18 for Warren to be that uninvolved. 0 catches on 1 target for Najee Harris to get 4 for like 4 on 5. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That has to change for the Steelers to win this game. Jaylen Warren, over under on receiving props is 2.5 receptions, minus 185. He's got to hit the over on that one, but they're not giving you a lot of juice on that one. Let's talk about
the juice makes it unplayable, unfortunately, but maybe the yards might be the way to go. And obviously, with any prop, always shop around. There's a lot of different outlets. Try to get the best number you can.
Let's talk about when the Ravens have the ball. The big injury issue here is that Zay Flowers, I would say, is probably a long shot to play in this game, which I do think matters. The Ravens offense has been so dynamic this season on their play action concepts, and just when they can leak Zay Flowers into the open space created by both Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson as runners, that's when their offense has really been dangerous. But Rashad Bateman coming off a big Week 18 game. Bateman's had a nice season for the Baltimore Ravens. I don't think that is enough in the passing game to win against some of the bigger boys in the AFC, but I think it can be enough to win this game against the Steelers.
Yeah, I agree. You would think Isaiah Likely, who's kind of a hybrid player, would get more snaps than normal in this game. And I don't think they're going to push Flowers, right? They have to see the big picture that they should beat Pittsburgh. They're not going to assume that. But if Flowers isn't 100%, you need him for the long haul. They're probably headed towards a Buffalo game next week. You need Flowers for that game if he can go. And Ravens have the best red zone touchdown percentage. That's so much of that is Jackson, who it's ironic he probably won't win the MVP, but this has been the best Lamar Jackson season. His stats are just ridiculous, right? Allen's going to win it because of narrative and maybe because he's working with less of the Buffalo offense, but I feel like this has been easily Jackson's best season. Pittsburgh, we always think about, oh, wow, you can't run the ball in Pittsburgh. Actually, their rushing defense has been worse in DVOA than the pass defense, so I would think it's a good Derrick Henry spot, but man, Jackson's going to be Superman. He makes so many plays after the structure breaks down and it becomes, okay, run to a space and, Lamar do Lamar things. The Bateman touchdown last week was like that, right? Where the original coverage wasn't bad. And then Lamar buys an extra second and then Bateman finds a seam and then Lamar throws it and turns his back and is like, okay, touchdown. I don't know how you defend that. you can't ask the secondary to hold up for that long. And Lamar finally has a clear picture. It used to be some of his scrambling seemed a little bit, I don't know. It almost looked like a chicken with his head cut off early in his career, where he just wasn't sure the right lanes to take or what he was seeing. Sometimes he didn't always make the best reads. He's finally grown up as a full, mature pocket passer, and then he has the athleticism to make a play when everything breaks down. The Steelers defense needs to be at its best to make this a competitive game. It's only been a good defense this year, not a great unit. I think Pittsburgh could easily get blown out because Jackson right now is Superman.
Yeah, I just don't see a way that, especially with some of the issues that they've had on the back end. Like, that's the thing. This, from like a freelancing perspective, Minkah Fitzpatrick, I don't think has had his best season this year. Like, they really have one cover corner in Joey Porter Jr. that's above average player. I mean, even some of the guys that they played at cornerback beyond Porter have been like net negatives at times. Certainly that was the case, in the last game of the season there against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins there for the Steelers defense. Like, I just can't see a way that secondary is able to compete with this Ravens passing game, even if there is no Flowers. Like, even Bateman's a guy that's gotten loose, and I think Bateman, one of the biggest things that you could criticize Bateman, even when he was healthy at times, which has not been very often, I don't think he was always one of these quarterbacks or one of these wide receivers that was good at working with a quarterback on a scramble drill, and like when Lamar would get out of trouble, he would like try to point Bateman the right, and like Bateman wasn't good at that. This year, I think Bateman actually, a lot of his big plays have come on some of those like broken down coverage plays by Lamar Jackson. So even he has an advantage, I think, there. Some Bateman props, like longest reception over 20.5 yards at -120, over under receiving yards 46.5. But the thing is, they could just run the piss out of the ball and it never matters. For the Baltimore Ravens, they don't need to throw the ball that much, but I do expect some big plays in the pass game regardless.
I'm not just going to endorse those props. I'm going to say he's going to beat them in the first half.
Really? You think in the first half?
It only takes one play. And as you mentioned that the familiarity, the comfort, right? These look like guys who know how to run the pick and roll now, where they didn't know how to run it the first year together. Bateman, and I give you credit, you always hung in on Bateman, right? When people are just right in the sky, I feel like, I still think Bateman can play. I still think there's a lot of good stuff I've seen on tape. And it was just learning the nuances of the position. And again, understanding what to do once the play breaks down and how do you get open. And the great thing is when you get open on those plays, it's a 40-yard catch, right? These aren't like open for like 9 yards and you move the chains. It's more like you break the defense's back. He's going to make a couple of plays like that in this game.
Yeah, he's really had a nice season for them. Hope he gets another contract extension after the 2-year that he got. Gets a little more money on that one. So I think we're both picking Baltimore. Are we laying the points on this one too?
I'm gonna take the Steelers and the points, but I think Baltimore's gonna win by more than a touchdown. So they're gonna win, which it's kind of threading a tight needle there. Pittsburgh will score a garbage touchdown to cover, but Baltimore will have the game well in hand.
I'll take Ravens -9.5. I think they win by 10+ points in this game. I just think they're clear. They might be the best team in the AFC right now. We'll see. Of course, we'll figure that out.
I'm picking them to go to the Super Bowl, even though they probably going to be on the road after this. But I think this is the year Lamar finally goes deep in the playoffs.
All right, let's move to the final game here. Well, actually, not the final game in this section, but the first game on Sunday, which is Denver Broncos at Buffalo Bills. Bills are 9-point home favorites, 47-point over-under. I'll be honest, before we get into this, Scott, this is the game I can't. This is the hardest one to figure out for me on the slate. I obviously have a lot of confidence in Buffalo, but let's talk about when the Broncos have the ball here, and I think we got to give this offense and this team overall its due here, because I think Vance Joseph's on the other side of the ball has done a great job coaching the defense, but man, this is a really put together offense that when Bo Nix is playing on schedule and not making mistakes under pressure, really, really a unit that can just kind of hum here in the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, we talked about the Chargers being ahead of schedule. How about the Broncos, right? I mean, if they just would have been a competitive team this year, it would have been a win for Sean Payton, and they turned into a playoff team. And Denver is 6th in pass rate over expected, so they have not hid their rookie quarterback. And a lot of people talk about, well, Nix was in college, longer than the Animal House guys. I mean, maybe he was better prepared to be a factor right away in the NFL. And, Sutton had a great season. Mims was splashing late in the year. There were Vele moments, maybe not recently, but he was playing pretty well around Thanksgiving or so. So and I never know which Denver running back to play. I mean, I guess McLaughlin has the most juice of all of them, but there's going to be a sprinkling of
none is the correct answer, I think.
Yeah, none is the correct. When you see 3, you flee. That's generally the rule of thumb. But Sean Payton is basically saying, yeah, I got a rookie quarterback, so what? We're going to throw. We're going to throw aggressively. We're going to throw proactively. In the Buffalo defense, it's a little bit easier per DVOA to attack through the pass and the run. So I think Sean Payton's going to be like, and remember the Broncos last year with Wilson, they went to Denver and won. It was a funky game. Sutton had a couple of just amazing catches, one of them in the end zone, just like one of the lowest probability receptions of the year. That's who Courtland Sutton is. He's a fantastic boundary receiver, understands space and leverage so well. And that was with Wilson not even playing well last year. And now he's at Knicks, who more hits than misses in his rookie year. A lot of times teams, it's a heavy, 8.5 point spread, right? A lot of times teams like, okay, let's not try to lose the game. Let's try to stay in it. Let's just settle in. I think Sean Payton's like, screw that. Let's come out and throw it. It's the better part of our offense. I trust my quarterback. I like the way the receivers are progressing. It's the better matchup we have on the defense anyway. So I think Bo Nix is going to throw 40 plus passes in this game, in part because we're probably trailing in the second half. But I think they're going to come out. I think they're going to come out throwing right away.
I completely agree with you. And you think about the way that the Bills play defense, they're 5th, according to Fantasy Points data, in too high coverage rate on the season. That is typically the Sean McDermott model. They want to play those 2 safeties back there. When you're, we've talked about this a lot on this season, when you see the 2 high safeties, the thing to do is not check it down and kind of like the coward's approach. It's rip it, like throw it between the 2 safeties, throw it in that area of the middle of like if you're getting cover 2, there's going to be an opening in the middle of the field for deep digs, posts and overs and things like that. That's the Bo Nix menu, which is ironic because he was coming into the league pitched as a guy that wanted to check the ball down a lot, wanted to throw a lot of screens, which was mostly just the product of the Oregon offense. But
right.
It's been clear for a long time now, Scott, that when that guy sees an opening over the middle of the field that he likes, he will throw it between the 2 safeties. He will rip it. Like Marvin Mims on these bigger post routes has been a big deal over the course of the back half of the season. And Sutton's best routes are the intermediate digs as well. So I definitely see a lot of pass attempts. And I think I would expect him to give 1 back to Buffalo. I think he'll throw at least 1 pick in this game. Sure. I think the over-under on the interceptions, like the over is minus 145 on 0.5. So like people are expecting him to throw a pick in this game, but I also expect some big pass completions on the other end of it from Bo Nix as well.
Yeah, you make such a great point because that Oregon offense was all about bubble screens and backward passes and stuff like that. And give Sean Payton credit. He said, okay, that's nice. That's what you ran. We're going to throw the ball downfield. And those intermediate passes with the opportunity to get yak, you want to attack a 2-deep look in the seams. It's a shame they don't have an impact player at tight end because that would be somebody you could really feature against Buffalo. We'll see that later in the season when they meet some different teams. But and also you mentioned the Knicks prop. Okay, he's going to throw a pick. If you think Buffalo wins the game, maybe you do, you parlay that with like Knicks making a turnover or 2, because I think that makes sense. Because again, I don't think Sean Payton's going to shrink from this game. He's going to say, this is who we are. This is what we do best. Let's try to do it, and let's take a swing at them. If we go down and we hit the canvas, that's okay. But we're not going to lose this game playing scared.
It's so funny, too, when just go back to that Oregon offense, that the top receiver on that Oregon team with Bo Nix, who is ironically still a teammate of Bo Nix in Denver, not had a great rookie season, has Troy Franklin, but you look at like his reception perception route chart, his worst 3 routes relative to the NFL or relative to prospect average, slant, dig, and out. And I would argue that those are like 3 of Bo Nix's best routes this season. Like when he's played on time with Courtland Sutton on these slants, really good stuff there. Dig routes and out routes in that intermediate area of the field. He's been great on those. And I think it was a bad fit that compounded the narrative on Bo Nix even more, that he was like not able to throw those. Well, yeah, because he's throwing to like 175-pound skinny guy who doesn't work the middle of the field well. So Bo Nix definitely goes down as an misunderstood prospect in this one. But yeah, I think this offense, it's not going to embarrass itself. It almost never does embarrass itself, but it is still a tall task for this Denver Broncos offense, rookie quarterback on the road in his first playoff start, no matter what his age is. And like some good role players here. Like, I mean, Courtland Sutton's had a great season, but beyond that, like, yeah, Vele's had some nice moments. Vele probably has if you just look at statistically, he's been a lot better against zone coverage than man coverage. The Bills are very zone coverage heavy. Marvin Mims has obviously emerged here. His longest reception prop is only 19.5 receiving yards. Like, he's a pretty decent bet, I think, to beat that if he gets one of those.
They're going to try. He may not catch them. They're going to throw those passes. Let me ask you before we close the book on Denver, because it may be the last time we get a chance to talk about them. Sutton, wide receiver 28 last year, wide receiver 10 this year, but he is 30 next season. What draft slot makes sense for Cortland Sutton in 2025?
Oh man, he'll be underrated, don't you think? He'll be pretty underrated from where he's gonna go.
I think you'll draft him at his floor probably, and they'll be great. Yeah. They'll be like, oh my God, they let me have Cortland Sutton in the 5th round, or maybe even late 4th round. Yeah, I'll be interested in that.
I think 5th round makes perfect sense, because you're sort of hedging your bets on like, all right, is there an age cliff? Not that I think we've seen anything, and I also think, by the way, his game can age well. These bigger wideouts who don't rely on like athleticism and speed, and like I think he's had to adjust his game a lot because he lost a decent bit of speed, and he was like, his second season in 2019 will go down as like a very, I think, like, forgotten great season in the course of like wide receiver lore or whatever. He had a great second season where he was physically dominant. But this player that we've seen now, I think, is much more of like a craftsman, a technician, working zone coverage on these intermediate routes and things like that. He's still a great high punter of the football, but I think his game can age well. Really, it will just come down to what does Denver do in this receiver room around him. I agree with you, tight end's a need, but it does feel like a spot where he can emerge here and continue to have like a nice finish to his career.
Yeah, I love you called him crafty, because that's the first word I think of when I think of Cortland Sutton. He's an artist.
Okay, so like, again, I think it's a tall task for this Broncos offense to keep up with the Bills. Let's talk about the Bills when they have the ball. Obviously, Josh Allen is the man. They have a lot of receivers kind of circling in his orbit. James Cook led the NFL in total touchdowns this year. What are we looking at when the Bills have the ball?
Yeah, Denver runaway leader in sacks this season, and Josh Allen has been the best at sack avoidance the last 2 years. So who wins that battle? Because they need somehow to rattle the cage of Josh Allen. I'm not confident they'll do it because nobody's really done it this year, but they're going to try to. And you want to avoid, obviously, Surtain, who's the best cover guy in the league. You would think to do that in the slot makes a lot of sense. So Khalil Shakir looks like a good play here. And I'll step on my props. I'll get to this later, but 6 of the last 7 games that he's played a full game, Josh Allen has scored a rushing touchdown. It's only minus 120 to minus 130, depending on where you shop. Again, poke around, get the best number. I would be flabbergasted if Josh Allen doesn't have a rushing touchdown in this game. But I'm most interested in, can their pass rush, and sometimes it isn't even getting the sack. You want the sack if you can get it, but can they hit Josh Allen? Can they get him off his spot? Can they just rattle the cage a little bit? I think they need to try to do that. And again, don't be afraid. I don't think Joseph will be. You're big underdog. Take a swing. Don't play conservative. You'll go after them. And if they beat you, they beat you.
Broncos top 5 in blitz rate on the season. That's kind of been the Vance Joseph model on that side of the ball. And I think they've been really willing to be creative with the pressures because they have a great cover corner on the back end in Patrick Surtain, who can just line, like, the Broncos are one of the most man heavy teams in the league. They're up there with the Detroit Lions and, some other teams who actually aren't very good this year. But in terms of like actually being strong and like playing great man coverage, they're one of the best teams in the league. Here's the problem though. Couple things. Number one, per Next Gen Stats, Josh Allen threw 16 touchdowns to 1 interception when facing the blitz this year. His 16 touchdowns were second most in the NFL, 8.5 yards per attempt against the blitz. And even more impressive, I would argue, is that he was pressured on just 34% of his blitzes faced, which was the 7th lowest in the league. I would give Joe Brady a lot of credit. Like, we talk about these offensive designers, Bobby Slowick and stuff like that. I think they did some pretty solid work last season in terms of the route concepts and like base Shanahan passing game stuff. Well, great. The protection rules still absolutely suck, and you get your quarterback killed on unblocked pressures. The Bills almost never do that. I think Joe Brady, not only does he design a good passing game, the protection rules are also pretty nice and tight there. That's a credit to the offensive line coach as well. However, so that's one part. And second part, I mentioned the Patrick Surtain thing is like, of all these playoff teams, I would argue that the Bills are one of the most well-equipped, Scott, to just sacrifice an outside receiver to Patrick Surtain. Like, oh, cool, you want to deal with Mac Hollins, Keon Coleman, shoot, even like Amari Cooper. Oh, we want to put him on the field to draw some attention away and just run Pat Surtain on, a bunch of gassers on the outside, and we'll pick our spots with like Khalil Shakir or some of the tight ends or even James Cook as a receiver. I think Buffalo is really well-equipped to go against this Denver Broncos defense.
Yeah, and I mentioned Shakir as I liked him in this game, but I think James Cook in the passing game is also a prop that I'd be willing to explore.
Yeah, the problem here for me is just, like I said, I think the more I think about the game, I do think that Denver can keep it interesting on the other side. I just think that what their superpower is, even if I like the offense, the superpower for Denver is the defense. And I'm just seeing like way too many areas where Buffalo has an advantage on that defense. So I don't know about you, Scott, but I am going to take Denver +9. I do think they can keep it close, but I do think Buffalo ultimately wins this game.
I do too. And I also think it will go over the 46.5 total.
I like that call. Yep, I think it can go over as well. All right, with that, let's take our first break. When we come back, we'll break down the 3 remaining games from Wild Card Weekend right after this.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right, we're back. Let's get into the next 3 games from Wild Card Weekend, starting with Packers versus Eagles in Philadelphia. The Eagles are 4.5-point home favorites. We got a 44.5-point total here. This is another interesting one, Scott, where I kind of struggle to get a read, certainly on the away team here. What are we expecting when the Packers have the ball?
Yeah, rematch of that first game, the foreign game, right? Where Jordan Love got hurt on the final series of the game. Oh, man, the Eagles defense is just a monster, right? 6.0 YPA allow, which is easily the best in the league, but they're second in run defense DVOA, easily the best defense in overall DVOA, and the Packers have the lowest pass rate over expected in the league. So Jordan Love, for whatever reason, it seems like he's lost a little bit of confidence. There hasn't been really anybody in the Green Bay receiving room who spread his wings. It really hurts that they lost Christian Watson, who was their downfield guy. So I think Green Bay, is going to come into this game like, we need Josh Jacobs. What do you have? 18 touches for 104 total yards in that first game. And it was such a long time ago. I'm not even sure how relevant that game is, but
that was the game where like 40 to 50% of the fantasy analysts you follow probably declared that he was washed in that first game, running on that like mud turf there in Brazil.
Field, man. When you get to play these foreign games, you got to have the facility be better than that. But I think Jacob's going to have 25 touches in this game. They are going to try to run the ball. They're going to be, man, it's just so hard to play any Green Bay receiver in fantasy this year because you just don't know. They're all going to get 4 to 6 targets. Even with Watson out, you would think, okay, things narrow a little bit, but I don't know that anybody's going to be prioritized. We know they rotate these guys. They always like them as blockers, but sometimes they're lacking the natural speed that you need. They're going to try to make it a Jacobs game, and they're going to it's going to be a little bit like how did the Steelers beat the Ravens? Well, you shorten the game and you try to make it a race to 20. I think the Packers would love it if this was a 20-17 game, and they're going to do everything to cultivate that.
Josh Jacobs, 16.5 is the over-under for the carries, minus 125 on the.
He'll beat that.
Yeah, he's got to beat that, right? Like
he'd have to get hurt to not beat that, or something would have to go horribly wrong. Where Philly ran a kickback and it was 17-0 after the end of the first quarter, which I really don't think is going to happen. By the way, that never happens with the Eagles. They're one of the worst first quarter offenses in the league. I have no idea why, but they just don't score in the first quarter. Then they kind of get their feet about them. So Green Bay will get the game they want. It will be 3-0 or scoreless after the first quarter, and Jacobs is going to have a ton of carries. I think that number. As always, if you're betting over on a prop, usually you want to bet it early. So if you're interested in some of this Jacob stuff, I'd get in on it now because I think the numbers will rise as the week goes along. But I see easily he goes into the mid-20s and carries.
I love this. And by the way, like the Eagles struggle in the first quarter. I would say that the Packers have really gotten off to some slow starts against great defenses lately. I mean, think about that game against the Vikings. Think about the game Thursday night against the Lions.
Both of their Vikings games. Yeah, it was like do your term paper the morning it's due, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So like I'm looking at the first quarter total in this one. It's 9.5 is the over under.
No way. No way. Bury the under, baby.
Right. Like these are two of the worst like starting offenses in like among these great teams we're talking about in the playoffs. And by the way, there's a ton of really good playoff teams this year. I think
when teams struggle on offense in the first quarter, you know what they do? They run the ball. They sit and try to say, okay, let's not overload anybody. Let's not try to be heroes. You know, the first play of the game is going to be either Jacobs or Barkley off tackle. I guarantee you that.
Yeah, and by the way, like the fact that these two teams are going to run the ball, that's going to speed that first quarter out. Oh, I'm like, I mean, it's going to suck when AJ Brown rips like a go route against the Packers cornerback, and then somehow, I don't know, somebody else on the other side scores a touchdown quickly.
One touchdown doesn't beat you.
I know, but I'm, you get.
And I also realized, Matt, there's a certain mentality. We live in our space, our fantasy space. People want to bet overs because they want things to happen. They want great players to play great. And I understand that. It's a certain type of, like I joked on Twitter maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I said, everybody wants to bet overs. I said, have you met Kyle Pitts? Because the Kyle Pitts under is like your Christmas club. It just hits every week. But it's a certain mentality.
I'm so guilty. I'm so guilty of this too. I'm so guilty of it too. Where I want things to happen, and I think it's easier to spot. Like a good matchup or here, like, he's going to absolutely go over this like 56 yardage totals, whatever arbitrary number. But it's still like the under is very, very live. And like if he has 50 yards and a touchdown, it's actually good for fantasy, but it's not good for it's so smart by you to say that. And I do think now my favorite bet of the weekend is going to be under 9.5 first quarter points.
I'm going to punch. As soon as we're done, I'm going to punch that. Yeah.
Oh, literally. Yeah. That's the first thing I'm going to do is hit that. Like, and so I can't wait for that to become like a first quarter shootout.
And then what you do when you bet unders is you just watch the clock run. You just love running plays.
That's what I'm saying. Like
you just love the official whirling that arm, keep the clock running, baby.
Yep. These two teams very run heavy. So I like it. Agree that this has to be a big Josh Jacobs game, but in the passing game for the Green Bay Packers, I'm with you that like you think the Christian Watson injury should narrow this thing down, but that just has not been the way they've played. They've also stayed very committed to the run in Green Bay. But man, I'll tell you what, if I'm Matt LaFleur, and I'm not, I know that Jaden Reed has like a 14.7 drop rate this season. He's had his issues catching the ball. Ironically, not ever down the field. Think about that first game where Jaden Reed was just going crazy against the Eagles. And like the defense has obviously gotten better. Cooper DeJean's in the lineup. He wasn't in the lineup really at that point. Quinyon Mitchell's been great, obviously, on the outside as a rookie corner. Their defense has changed since this first game, but I just did a awards show with James on the Reception Perception show, and like when we were looking at kind of superlative categories and stuff like that, there's so many areas where Jaden Reed is so good and so efficient, he just never gets the football enough. I would definitely be trying to scheme some like vertical routes from the slot if I'm Matt LaFleur, trying to target. These linebackers have played great this year in Philadelphia. Zach Bond is one of the stories of the season for how he's played for Philadelphia. But still, I'd be trying to get Jaden Reed on some of these linebackers and trying to rip him downfield because I think that's the only way they can kind of keep up here.
Something else they're going to try to do, whether the interior screen game or some of the downfield routes, Tucker Kraft, his longest catch the last 5 weeks, 20, 35, 30, 26, 21. This is a tight end who they love to, again, a lot of times is in the screen game. The Packers have always traditionally been a great screen team. This goes way back to, the Ahman Green days and everything, the Mike Holmgren days. They're going to try to get some splash plays from Tucker Kraft. I don't know what his longest reception prop is, but that's something I'd be interested in too.
Well, and it's also multiple ways, too, that they can hit that, because I think there's been a lot of times during the course of the season where Tucker Kraft has been just the guy in the flat and all of these, like, because they've really tried to hit vertical routes with this passing game this year. They want to take shots off play action with Jordan Love's big arm, and they want to rip that thing downfield. Tucker Kraft, longest reception, by the way, 16.5. Minus 120 is the over on his longest reception.
He's 16.5. He's beat that 6 straight weeks. So, okay.
I like it. I like that call. And again, when they just have him out in the flat, he is a beast after the catch. Now, again, this is a great Eagles defense, so I'm not 100% sure that like a lot of these things that we're outlining, like I would try to scheme this up. I try to do this. I don't know if this can happen against this Eagles defense because they are such a good unit on that side of the ball, and they have a lot of matchup advantages. Jalen Carter against the interior of the Packers offensive line is definitely an area to watch.
Their defensive personnel is unfair, man. This Eagles defense is playmakers on all three levels, and they're a problem. If I knew Jalen Hurts were healthy, confident, and played at even like an average level for him, I'd have them in the Super Bowl right now.
Let's talk about that Eagles offense, who also has a bunch of superstars. You know, A.J. Brown has had a great efficient season when he's been on the field. Devonta Smith, super effective when he's been on the field. Saquon Barkley, obviously coming off 2,000 yards. The big question here is just Jalen Hurts. He's still in the concussion protocol as of the time we're taping this. I would expect him to play in this game, and we'll see what happens because, man, when that offense does get hot outside of the first quarter, because we're getting our under 9.5 here, this is an offense that can really cook. And this Green Bay defense, I think, has been a little hit or miss all season.
Yeah, I was surprised their metrics are better than I thought they would be. Packers are 9th in pass defense DVOA and 7th in rush defense DVOA. 45 sacks is above the league equator. Eagles are 3rd in the lowest pass rate over expected, which again fits some of those things we were talking about with the teams coming out conservatively. Obviously, Barkley had a season. He'll probably be Offensive Player of the Year. Average touchdown, I say this every week, but average touchdown for Barkley this year was 29.4 yards. He didn't have a single 1-yard touchdown because Hurts had 11 of them. Man, that's just so hard for any player to do, especially a running back. So just a special year for Barkley, and what a great year for the veteran running backs changing teams because they all went to better teams, right? Henry went to the Ravens and Jacobs went to the Packers, and Barkley gets out of New York and goes to Philly, tri-state area, but a couple hours but away by car, but it's like 3,000 miles away by actual viability. They're going to come out conservative. They're going to come out running the ball. We know the play action to A.J. Brown is what a great play. A.J. Brown was on Tennessee, and they just, it's like, why is he getting 5 to 7 targets a week? And now he's on the Eagles. Remember, they had the whole story like a month ago. It's like, do Hurts and Brown even like each other? Are they friends? Have they fallen out? And they just kind of laughed at that. And they had a big game shortly after that was, a story for a week or two. But I still think this is a game where we're going to be like, wow, why did Brown, you think of Julio Jones getting 4 targets in the Super Bowl? This game's going to end and we're going to be like, why did A.J. Brown get 6 targets? He needs more than that. And someday I'd like to see him in an offense. It's a pass first offense. It is not this team. I think the only way the Eagles lose here, because I don't like the way Green Bay finished the season, and I don't like the way Hurts played this year. I'm sorry, I don't like the way Love played this year, but Hurts would have to really throw up all over him, which I think is possible. I don't know who Hurts is as a passer right now. If he has a poor game, the Packers can steal this game. If Hurts plays even adequately, I think Philadelphia wins easily.
I think it has to be a big Jeff Hafley game, Packers defensive coordinator. I would say that their blitzes are like kind of hit or miss in Green Bay, but there's been a couple of times where I think they've thrown some good blitzes at quarterbacks. And obviously, when you just think of Jalen Hurts, the stuff that's given him the most problems is when you play zone coverage, because he averages a league high 9.6 yards per attempt against man this season, but 18th against zone coverage. And you throw a lot of blitzes at his face. Eagles defense obviously is a better blitzing team, I think, certainly than the Packers, but the Packers have had their moments this year. That's really going to have to be where they win. I will say, I think Saquon Barkley has a big game in, maybe not a big game, but he has a couple of notable plays in the passing game. 11.5 receiving yards is the prop for Saquon Barkley, minus 120 on the over. I do think the Packers give up the 3rd most catches and the 3rd most yards to running backs this year. I think the way they beat the blitz in this one for Philadelphia is they have to use Barkley in the passing game. We saw him actually have a couple of designed shots in week 1. Kellen Moore did a nice job ISOing him up and having him be a receiving option in this week 1 game, obviously a long time ago, but I do think that that's going to be pertinent analysis in this one.
Yeah, I love that call on the Barkley receiving. Even though he only had 43 targets, I feel like they could always use him more as a receiver. I think an underreported story was that he wasn't an explosive pass catcher his last 3 years with the Giants, and then this year his yards per target spiked by almost 2 yards. So they got him, again, better teammates, maybe better scheming and all that, but I wasn't sure that Barkley was a difference maker in the pass game anymore, even though this year they haven't used him as much as I think they could. It's just nice to see the splash plays returning in that part of his game as well.
All right, let's move to the next game here on Sunday. The final game.
We're both taking the Eagles.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll go Eagles minus 1.5
Eagles and
here.
under. Although again, the under you want is that first quarter under. We really hammered that, but I think that's something you want to punch.
Yeah, good call. Good job podcasting, Scott. Me, the host here, idiot, moving along before picking the game. Yes, we're both on Eagles minus 4.5 on this one. Okay, next game, final game of Sunday. Commanders at Bucks. Bucks are 3-point home favorites. We've got a beefy 50.5 point total on this one, which is justifiable. I think we're going to see a lot of points in this particular game. Let's talk about when the Commanders have the ball, Scott, and what are they going to be able to do? What are they going to be able to do to one of the most generous pass defenses league wide here?
Yeah, there you go. I mean, Tampa Bay 23rd in pass defense, DVOA 6th in rushing DVOA. This is another
23rd
week one.
Feels rich, by the way.
Yeah.
Like that feels higher than I'd expect.
Right. I'm like, did a couple teams disband or something like that? Yeah. I would have guessed they were like 29th or 30th, but whatever. They're,
FTN relegated a few bad teams. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Did Schatz miss a couple of weeks or something like that? The great Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders, now FTN, who has been giving us great data for years. They played a high-scoring game. Again, it was week 1, and some people may say, well, in September, who cares? But if you're playing in these one-and-done pools where you have to attack teams, you can only use them once. This is a game you're going to feature because you think neither one of these teams will probably get to the Super Bowl. You don't want to leave this game on the bone. This is another, I talk about, you need the quarterback to be Superman. Daniels is going to throw proactively. This is how you get Tampa Bay. They're not going to find running lanes. I think Brian Robinson is like him as a player, but he's really probably closer to a Jag than I want to admit. They need a lot of McLaurin here. Zacchaeus has actually been useful the last few weeks. It's been a great Zach Ertz season, despite being in his mid-30s. I thought he'd start fresh. I didn't know how he'd finish. He actually finished the season just fine, thank you. So going to be a lot of Daniels throwing in this game. And also Daniels, he had 88 rushing yards in that first game. His rushing prop is something that I immediately circled. A lot of times you see the quarterbacks get more look, there's nothing to save yourself for. If you lose, you don't play next week. So it's common for running quarterbacks to maybe take it up with a little bit more YOLO in that part of their game. I think Daniels will do that. They may be chasing the game because they may have trouble stopping Tampa Bay. I'm thinking it's high scoring, and I think Jaden Daniels is going to have a monster fantasy game, probably in a loss. But Jaden Daniels is going to have like 32 fantasy points at the end of this day.
I think that's so accurate. And I mean, the big thing for Jaden Daniels, this goes all the way back to his college days. When he gets pressure, he's going to try to scramble out of it. And I will say, even if I think the defense has been so underwhelming in Tampa Bay, Todd Bowles can still cook up I think this happened in week 1. And it is so long ago. The Commanders are doing things different offensively, especially with Terry McLaurin. I don't think a lot of those stats carry over because that was still very much, he was on one side of the field. They do a lot more moving around with him now to get matchups.
Yes.
Thankfully,
we were all screaming for that, and it finally came to roost. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fairness to Cliff, it only took about 3 weeks. Usually it happens never, but at least it took 3 to 4 weeks for him to move on a little bit there. Especially in the back half of the year, that's been a thing. So I don't know if those stats carry over, but still, I think the core of who Jaden Daniels is as a player, and I don't fault him for this, that when he gets pressure, he's going to try to take off and scramble. And I think that I like that you're going to highlight his rushing prop there because that's a big one I had my eye on as well.
45.5, by the way, is what I'm seeing. That will be in the 50s if you take it on the weekend. So again, if you're interested in doing that, you want to do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, do not wait until kickoff because that bad boy is certainly going to have a 5 in the first number there for the Jaden Daniels rushing yards. But yeah, otherwise, I definitely think I'm going to talk about Terry McLaurin props in our section. I think he's obviously in a really good spot here. This defense is just so problematic, and man, I mean, he can sting you for downfield plays. Terry McLaurin, man, 13 touchdowns this year, second only to Jamar Chase. Scott, we finally got the Terry McLaurin season that I think we were always hoping for.
Yeah, where do we draft him next year? He's another guy who's going to be 30, right? Just finally tied, and very quietly, we say he finally got a great quarterback, and had the season we're waiting for. He's got 1,000 yards in 5 straight seasons. Think of some of the quarterbacks he's had that even his rookie year was 919. I mean, he's always been good. And now because the quarterback is great, he can be great. He's kind of a sneaky 30. He came into the league a little bit older at age 24, his rookie season. 4th round, 3rd round, 5th round. Where are we taking McLaurin next year?
I think 4th round probably feels right for Terry, which seems like a decent discount, but he was 12th among wide receivers in yards, and obviously the touchdowns really propped up his finish. And like, I don't know. I want to talk out of both sides of my mouth on that one because, like, yeah, obviously there's going to be some, touchdown regression. 13 is a career high touchdown.
To what? 8 or 9 touchdowns, right?
Yeah, right. But he had 117 targets, which is actually the lowest he's had since his rookie season. He went 134, 130, 120, 132, 117 this year, which again is a low mark, but. And I do think they need to add other receiving talent. So he's certainly not going to, but like if he had this season this year, it's worth a 2nd round pick or something like that, 2nd, 3rd. I think you're still getting a decent discount on that.
But I like the target rate actually went up in the final quarter of the year. And as you mentioned, when Cliff finally unlocked McLaurin as a movable piece and not the idea that they would start games and make him so easy to defend. Well, Terry McLaurin is going to be right here and he's going to stand right here and then we're going to snap the ball. It's like, why would you ever do that? But as you mentioned, Kingsbury did see the light early in the season. And also, with Daniels, back to that rushing prop, right? I mean, he had the rib injury middle of the season. He kind of shelved the running game around that time. And I don't know for a fact that this is because he had the rib injuries, but it certainly makes plausible sense to say that. He was really healthy down the stretch. He was I think top 7 quarterback his final 5 weeks of the fantasy playoffs, and there's like some 1s and 2s in there. And he was one of the most important quarterbacks you could have. I can't say enough. I'm picking Tampa Bay in this game, but man, I think Washington's going to get like 27 points or 30 points, and they're going to put up 400 plus yards. This is going to be, if you like offense, this is going to be the game to watch this weekend.
I don't personally hate myself enough to bet on Zach Ertz props on wildcard weekend, but if I did, I do think he can get over 4.5 catches at plus odds, plus 120. I think he can have a couple of good moments there. So, all right, let's talk about when the Bucs have the ball. I'm with you. I'm also going to pick Tampa Bay in this one, but still, I don't know. To calibrate to their offense is a little difficult because they kind of had a weird week 18 where they felt like they were sort of sleepwalking, but they had so many good performances from young players. Bucky Irving, Jalen McMillan obviously finished the season strong. And we can't talk about this game without discussing the Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Evans, part however many of them. So if Evans gets thrown out of this game, I mean, come on, we got then they'll really be in trouble.
Yeah, well, 2 things that I focused on when I was breaking this game down. First, Washington has the worst run defense DVOA of any of the playoff teams. They're 26th. And what did Tampa Bay become down the stretch? Since their bye week, they said Bucky Irving, backfield, you got the keys. I don't think Rashad White is a bad player. Bucky Irving can be a special player. He might be a 2nd round pick next year for fantasy. He's going to go over 100 yards in this game. With Lattimore and Evans, what a blast it's going to be watching those guys. I mean, McMillan, who had 7 touchdowns in his last 5 games, I realize he didn't go crazy with the yardage, but I think the odds of Jalen McMillan getting a touchdown this game are very high. And also, look, Baker, 41 touchdowns was it? It's just crazy, the arc of his career, right? He goes to the playoffs with the Browns. He scares the Chiefs. They've got their guy. And then he has 1 year where his shoulder's all messed up and then Cleveland just totally reboots and made a bunch of bad decisions that we don't need to talk about right now. It's just so fun to watch Baker being Baker. Again, he's going to throw one to Washington probably early in the game. I think Washington will have the lead in the first half of this game. And then the Bucs will settle down and Irving will start to gash them. And I think McMillan scores another touchdown. I don't think it'll be a huge Evans game. It certainly won't be like last week where they were trying to get Evans the targets, the yards. I love what they did. I know that there was a tiny chance it would blow up in their face, but I love that they said, Mike Evans, he's been a warrior for us for over a decade. He's the foundation of our franchise. This matters to him. Let's do it. Let's put him in the slot, get a defined throw and get him the yards. I thought that was awesome. It would have been so hard to lose at that point, the playoff spot, but just to be good to your best players, be good to all your players, but to be good to basically your team captain, I thought was awesome. But I think it's a McMillan touchdown game. I think it's an Irving over 100 yards game. I do think Baker will come out. Maybe he passes 10 to Sale when he comes out a little bit too hyped up at times. I think he'll throw one to Washington early, but I think Tampa Bay will eventually get its sea legs and largely because of Irving control this game in the second half.
Yeah. Washington, since week 10, they're 4th in dropback success rate allowed. They're like middle of the pack in terms of their run defense. So I like that call. This should be a big Bucky Irving game. I will say, like, Marshawn Lattimore, like they traded for him. He hasn't really been a huge factor because he's been kind of off and on the field with a hamstring injury. But if he can show up in this game, they are a very man coverage heavy team. On late downs, they play man coverage at the fourth highest rate, just around 50% according to Fantasy Points data. But Mike Evans has smoked man coverage as usual all season long. He's third in first downs per route run against man coverage, behind only the great A.J. Brown and Puka Nacua. So like, if they can hold back Mike Evans in man coverage, that definitely is going to leave some things open for like McMillan and these guys. But I would still say that like Washington secondary wise can hold back. Like some of the McMillan plays have not always come against man coverage. They've come against these like kind of looser zones, things like that. That's where he's made more, but he's a pretty decent man coverage route runner at the same time too. So I would say that again, this does come down to, I think, how could Marshawn Lattimore hold back Mike Evans, because obviously if Mike Evans has a big game, I do think Washington's going to struggle to survive that. But there are some ancillary matchups too that can still favor Tampa Bay as well.
And I think McMillan's another great case of a little bit overloaded at first. There were injuries in the Tampa Bay receiving room. We thought McMillan would step up, and initially he did not. But he looked like a totally different player the final 5-6 weeks of the season. And I was encouraged, and you can speak to this better than I can, and maybe you won't agree with me, but I thought his diversity of routes was actually more advanced late in the year than I was expecting. I mean, he wasn't just a specialty guy who could only do a couple of things. I thought the menu was wider than I thought, and I think that speaks really well to his eventual potential the next few years.
Yeah, no, I do think that he expanded it, like some of the intermediate stuff maybe more than I thought. And like I've said, I have to definitely give him a lot of credit because I thought he was actively bad at times.
Me too.
For Tampa Bay. Like early on in the season, I was like, this guy, it's not great.
And they didn't trust him. They basically turned their back on him at one point and said, okay,
they're like, we gotta play Sterling Shepard. And I love Sterling Shepard, but it's
Kate Otten was like the featured guy in the offense for like 3 or 4 weeks when he was healthy. Yeah.
Since week 13 for Jalen McMillan. He's third on the team in yards per route run against man coverage specifically. First downs per route run, not too great. It has mostly been when you look at like zone coverage plays, things like that. But then again, like it's I guess yards per route run probably can't do a good job of explaining this because it's been like big plays for him, because actually yards per route run against man coverage zone coverage is actually lower than his man coverage number as well. So I don't know, the fact that there maybe are some man coverage advantages for this Bucs team could maybe lead you to saying that they can get the edge on Washington here, which is how I think we both feel.
I've also seen Baker being willing, like we saw this with Jawan Jennings and Brock Purdy, where, okay, my guy doesn't have a lot of separation, or maybe any separation. You know what? I'm throwing the ball to him anyway. Make a play.
Yeah, and McMillan made a play in Week 18 in a contested situation, which that has been an area where he definitely has, even during his hot stretch, he struggled, I think, with some physical play and like getting balls away from his frame and things like that. But I'm picking Tampa Bay -3. It sounds like you are as well.
I am, but high scoring, and there's a lot of Washington props I think are really good.
All right, final game of Wild Card Weekend, Vikings at Rams, 47.5 point total. The Vikings are actually 1.5 point road favorites in this one, which I think is interesting. Of course, this just moved as we're looking at this. It's a 48 point total, and the Vikings are only 1 point favorites on the road. Obviously, big factor here is this game going to be in Los Angeles at SoFi Stadium with everything that's going on in LA right now with the wildfires. So this game could be moved to Arizona, I believe is the plan if they have to move it. But yeah, that's obviously a big factor here, and everything like home game Rams, that whole deal. But we've seen this. This is another matchup we've also seen before, Scott. So let's talk about when the Vikings have the ball here.
Yeah, the Rams got the win in Week 8 when these teams met. And, again, we want to be human. I mean, there's a lot going on in Southern California right now, and it makes it dangerous to me to try to. And that's the most important thing. I want to make it very clear. We all understand that. But football is such a game of routine that when the routine is upset, I just don't know how that bleeds into the actual playing of the game. That makes me a little bit nervous. But when the Vikings have the ball, look, the Rams have the worst defense and the worst pass defense, DVOA, of any of the playoff teams, right? They're well into the 20s in both of those stats. And Minnesota is second in pass rate over expected. What they need to do, last week, they got beat up. Aaron Glenn had a great game plan. Sam Darnold missed a lot of throws he usually makes. Obviously, he was pressured with a lot of those blitzes getting home. And just, Jefferson wasn't a factor. Addison wasn't a factor. But Darnold had and I know a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, same old Sam Darnold. This is why you don't sign him. This is why, J.J. McCarthy's going to be their guy and all that. I believe in who Sam Darnold was for 4 months. Everybody has a couple of games like that. And Detroit gets paid too. They had some key guys come back. I think Minnesota's back to, you can throw on the Rams. you have a dynamic Minnesota passing tree where they all do different things well. They complement themselves well. Their route combinations work well. I think Sam Darnold's going to throw for 3 touchdowns and 300 yards in this game. And I think it's, again, if you're in those one and done leagues, I think it's a great week to load up on the Minnesota passing game.
Sam Darnold, according to Next Gen Stats, threw 73.2% of his passes after 2.5 seconds this season, which was the highest rate in the NFL, which is actually pretty crazy. You think about these guys like you want to get the football out of their hands quickly so they don't make mistakes. Actually, I mean, and it didn't work. Week 18 is the ultimate outlier, and I think that's gonna bleed into our heads a little bit. That anytime Darnold got off script, he had to move around. Like, he did hold the ball, and really, I mean, nothing good happened when he held the ball in that particular game. But otherwise, when he's had to like go through progressions and he's had time to do it in the pocket, that's probably the key thing here. When he's had time to do it in the pocket and he's been able to go through progressions, he's found a lot of answers in this Vikings passing game, particularly against some of the defenses like he's going to see in LA, where it's their 9th in terms of zone coverage, 8th highest in terms of zone coverage rate on late downs, 60.7% according to fantasy points data. And the Vikings have been so good against zone coverage all season long because of the matchup advantages that having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison bring them.
Right. And Detroit was playing the exact opposite last week, where it's like, we're going to go cover 0 and try to beat us. We're going to try to get home with our blitzes. Also, this is, for me, it's a vote of confidence for Kevin O'Connell. It's a vote of confidence for Josh McCown, who's part of their coaching staff as well, who I think is going to be a great head coach maybe 3 or 4 years down the road. This year seems a little bit early on that, but I always thought he was just a really smart guy at the end of his career.
He was taking head coaching interviews before he ever coached in the NFL. Remember the whole Jack Easterby Houston Texans nonsense? For
sure. But hey, he's a rising star. Obviously, Agreed. O'Connell is going to probably be coach of the year. He's 1 year left on his contract. Time for Minnesota to open up the vault to keep Kevin O'Connell. I don't think he's going anywhere, but he's going to get a big paycheck and well-deserved. I think O'Connell's going to be like, I think he brought in Sam Darnold on Monday and said, hey, it's one game. It happened. We lost it. No problem. We'll see those guys again. Let's figure out how we can shred the Rams. And I think they are going to shred the Rams in this game.
Yeah, I agree. Even from a pass rush standpoint, I think that Jared Verse has had a great rookie season, tons of pressures this season, and I will give the Vikings a lot of credit for getting beyond. Like, you lose Christian Darrisaw. Actually, they lost him in this game on Thursday night several weeks ago. They trade for Cam Robinson. He's had himself like up and down season for sure, but they've survived it on the offensive line. Like, typically you just don't see that happening, but I think they can have the edge here offensively when they have the ball. The run game's definitely been a little spotty of late for the Vikings, but that's they've like a lot of Cam Akers for my liking, which isn't totally unexpected, right? I mean, Aaron Jones is an older back who's dealt with injuries, but still, when he's had his nice moments, we just haven't seen a lot of we haven't seen a lot of Aaron Jones moments lately. But running back will certainly be a need for the Vikings in the offseason.
You know what? I will admit, Akers looks a little bit more, explosive than I remember him. I mean, they basically ran him out of town with the Rams, and then he didn't do much last year with Minnesota. He didn't do much with Houston this year. I've actually liked the splash of Cam Akers that I've seen. I thought they got away from Aaron Jones a little bit too quickly in the Detroit game. What did he have at IV at halftime, I want to say, so maybe that was part of it. But I'd like to see a little, even though I talked about Minnesota shredding in the pass game, I think they will. It's going to help that the zone will create defined throws for Darnold. I think it'll allow him to be more comfortable. He's facing the type of defense, and they've seen them too already, which is I always think is a great advantage if you trust a coaching staff. If they have a game they can work off, it was recent enough that I think we can apply some of those games, even though the Rams did win that game. Again, Minnesota, man, they're going to score. They're scoring 30 points this week. I'm going to guarantee that.
All right, so let's talk about when the other team has the ball here, the Los Angeles Rams. How many points can they score to keep up with the 30 that Minnesota's dropping?
Yeah, I'm worried here. I mean, the Rams 19th in yards per point, which is easily the worst of the playoff teams. And Stafford just a 5.9 YPA in his last 3 games, 153 yards per game, just 1 total touchdown. Cooper Kupp looks really old right now. Stafford turns 37 in February. It has not been a good year for older quarterbacks. They're really bad for fantasy, and I think Stafford is more of a limited player. Now, he has been avoiding sacks, and that's really important. I mean, Minnesota 4th in sacks. We know Brian Flores is going to get in your grill and was not afraid to be aggressive doing it. They didn't sack Stafford in the first game, and Stafford hasn't taken a sack in his last 3 or 4 games, but where are the explosive plays, right? I mean, Puka Nacua, if the Rams are going to win, Nacua has to have 13 for 178 and 2. That has to happen. Minnesota also, I talked about how great the Philadelphia defense is. Minnesota second DVOA defense, first against the pass, fifth against the rush. I think the offense problems for Minnesota last week made the defense look worse. They had to be on the field too much. And look, Jahmyr Gibbs just had a special night. Remember, the Lions didn't do a lot on offense in the first half of that game.
Great point.
I don't hold what the Vikings allowed in the second. I think that's more a statement of what Darnold wasn't doing, what the offense wasn't doing. You're going 3 and out constantly. You had all those red zone trips that came up empty. Stafford, it's great he hasn't been sacked, but he hasn't looked right for almost a month now. And I just don't think Cooper Kupp's the same player anymore. He's a good player, but he's not the explosive. 2021, he was the best player in the league, probably should have won MVP. I think Sean McVay is a really smart coach. I don't know how much all the outside distractions this week, and again, we're human. They're more important in a football game. I don't know how much that affects their preparation for this game, but I do think the Vikings will get home for a couple of sacks. I don't trust Stafford right now in a spot like this. I think Minnesota's going to win by double digits.
Oh man, that's spicy. I like it though. I'm with you in a lot of my trust issues with the Rams offense. Their run game is not explosive, and outside of Puka Nacua, their pass game is not explosive either. They just don't have a lot of speed. Actually, the one guy that they have with speed is Tutu Atwell. Who is kind of like if I was to give my like sicko prop of the week,
right.
9.5 catch. Well, dude, his receiving yard period prop is 9.5 at BetMGM. Like he's definitely beating that at -120. He's second behind only his teammate Puka Nacua in first downs per route run against zone coverage. The Vikings are one of the zone heavier teams in the league, although they've switched it up and thrown man in certain matchups, like against the Arizona Cardinals is one, against the Green Bay Packers down the stretch is another one. So I don't want to go like really with my chest and say, oh yeah, you were definitely going to get a bunch of zone coverage from Minnesota, because they flipped that on its head, especially on later downs. But like a first down play action shot to Tutu Atwell, give me 10 yards. I think he can totally get that in this game. But despite that, he's the only guy they have with speed, and Stafford under pressure has just been a huge problem this season. Per Next Gen Stats, Stafford 44.6% completion rate when facing pressure this season, 7th lowest in the NFL. This is the first time since 2018 he's had a completion percentage under 50% and just 2 touchdown passes per NGS under pressure this season. In the matchup against the Vikings, he actually didn't face a lot of pressure, didn't face a lot of blitzes particularly, and that was where he was able to be super effective. I don't think Brian Flores allows that to happen.
Yeah, he cooked in that game. He's not going to cook here. What happens is you pressure Stafford and he gets rid of the ball and he throws an incomplete pass. Does he avoid the sack? Yes. Does he make a positive play? No.
Yep. I wonder what the completion prop is for Stafford this week, because I could see him, being under.
The story's going to be, and I hate to say this, I love Matthew Stafford. I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer. But after this game, when the Vikings win, the story is going to be, how much further can the Rams go with Matthew Stafford?
I don't know if it's so much a Stafford thing. I just think it's probably more so the guys around him. I think he needs more than just Puka Nacua, and I think that's the problem right now is they have just Puka Nacua.
It was a win they made the playoffs. This is a flawed team.
Totally.
Right? I mean, of course, it was, the NFC West was full of flawed teams, right? Arizona was the favorite to go, and then, Kyler Murray's like, no, we don't want to do this. Seattle, they collapsed so much that they fired their offensive coordinator. I've been going back and forth with Dave Kluge about, was Chris Grubb, did they do him bad? Should he have gotten another year? Geno Smith didn't have a great season. We know it was a nice JSN breakout. Everything went wrong for the 49ers, who were in the Super Bowl last year. Just everybody got hurt. And, it was a terrible Deebo Samuel year. Somebody had to win that division. It was the Rams, but they did it with a bunch of scotch tape and a bunch of patchwork stuff. And I just think eventually that's going to run out, and probably this week.
Stafford, 22.5 is the completions line for him on BetMGM. Okay, let's pick this game. I think we're both taking Vikings. And I mean, yeah, comfortably. If it's -1, then yeah, we're taking Vikings -1. Scott's very confident it's going to be. I'm a little more like, I think the Rams could lose by a touchdown. You're seeming more like double digits here for the Rams.
And plus, I feel almost gross mentioning this, but there will be no home field advantage for the Rams. They won't have it in Los Angeles with the distractions, and just LA just hasn't really gotten behind the Rams, and the game might be played in Arizona. How can you have a home field advantage when you're playing out of state? That's just a huge advantage for Minnesota to step into a road game that doesn't feel like one.
All right, let's take our final break. We come back, we'll throw out we've thrown out a bajillion props on this show, but we'll throw out 4 of our favorite here right after this. All right, we're back. Let's bring in our final segment here. Welcome to Prop It Up. Scott and I each have 2 props, so 4 total that, we may have teased these earlier. I know we talked about a bajillion props in the show, but these are, we'll call them, we're not going to do anything. These are our best bets, but these are 4 of our favorites here that we like for wild card weekend that you consider for maybe throw some parlays with some of the other ones we've mentioned. Maybe you take these straight, whatever. Scott, give me your first prop that you like here in the segment.
Yeah, Josh Allen, a rushing touchdown in 6 of 7 games, and his career arc has always been when the weather gets cold, Josh Allen starts running more, so he's going to get a rushing. It's about minus 130 is what I saw on MGM. There are other shops that may be a better number. Again, if you want to bet proactive, you want to bet on something happening, take it early in the week. Josh Allen's getting a rushing touchdown this week.
My first one actually is a Buffalo Bills player as well. Khalil Shakir over 54.5 receiving yards, minus 115. I think Shakir is in a great spot in this one. He's been Buffalo's most efficient receiver this season. He's been particularly good on underneath throws. He's catches everything. He makes plays after the catch. On passes under 8 air yards, he averages over 8 yards after the catch per reception. So he gets it in his hands. He does things with it. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, I think that not only has Joe Brady done a great job blocking things up and setting protection rules for the Buffalo Bills, and Josh Allen has taken a lot of ownership on that stuff as well, but they also have quick answers against the blitz, Khalil Shakir being one of those answers. And as the slot receiver for this team with so many guys that they can sacrifice to the outside coverage of Patrick Surtain and even Riley Moss, he's going to have so many good coverage looks. I expect him to have a big game against the Denver Broncos defense in Buffalo this weekend.
Yeah, I love that. You could even take one of the outside receivers to go under his prop, wondering if he'll end up on the island where Surtain is so good, maybe the defensive player of the year. But yeah, Shakir has been the easy button for Buffalo in the passing game. Very reliable. My other prop, Washington, Tampa Bay, is going to be a lot of scoring. We know Tampa Bay, you don't run on them, you throw on them. Jaden Daniels will have the ball in his hands. He had 88 rushing yards in their first matchup a million years ago, but so what? 45.5 is the current number. It's going to rise. So if you're like me and you like Daniels to beat that prop, take it early. He's going to have 70 or 80 rushing yards in this game and maybe even a rushing touchdown.
Love it. I love this call. As we mentioned earlier, Jaden Daniels, when he gets pressure, he's going to take off and scramble. He's probably going to get some pressure from the blitz in this game. Really love this call by Scott. And again, as you mentioned earlier, do it now. Like as you're listening to this, go out and take this right now because that bad boy is going to be in the 50s by the weekend. I will talk about a Washington Commanders player here for my fourth and final prop of the segment here. Terry McLaurin over longest reception, 23.5 yards, minus 115. Terry McLaurin was such a monster with Jaden Daniels on these deep outside targets this year. Third in the NFL in yards per route run on targets of 20 plus air yards, 0 drops. 4 of his 13 touchdowns came in this regard. Look, the Bucs, they play a ton of zone coverage. We know that. They play a lot of blitzes to that zone coverage, so there's going to be some ISO looks there. Terry McLaurin has been great in terms of making those big plays. And that's why I'm going the longest reception here as opposed to like a yardage prop or anything like that, because I think he gets at least one big play here. 17th among qualified receivers in yards per route run against zone coverage. I really expect him to have a big moment against this Bucs defense.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And also, Zacchaeus was a big part of their offense the last 3 weeks, 70, 85, and 51 yards. Usually props on a player like this the book will put out something that's more seasonal focused and may not adjust to what's been happening lately. I bet whatever the Zacchaeus prop is, I bet it's too low. I think that's something worth an explore as well.
It's a good call. Well, on that note, it's going to do it. That's going to do it, Scott. That's a beefy wild card preview we just gave the people. So I hope you enjoy the games, buddy, and I hope we both enjoy our under first quarter Eagles-Packers bet.
For sure. Yeah, you probably just wanted a phone number. We gave you the phone book, but hey, when there's 6 football, this is the last 6 game slate of the year, man. So we had to step into it, and thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Scott, it's always fun. You're going to be doing this for the divisional round as well, so we'll crack open the phone book there. Fewer games, but nevertheless, it'll still be pretty electric. I really appreciate you stepping into these playoff previews. This was great content for the people out there. That is going to do it for us today. I hope you all enjoy Wildcard Weekend. We certainly gave you a lot to stew on, some props, some matchups, things of that nature. We will be back on Tuesday because we do have that Monday Night Football game. So we'll be back on Tuesday of Wildcard Weekend to recap everything. Andy Behrens is going to be with me to join that show. So again, no show on Monday. The show will come out on Tuesday. We'll try to get it out, pretty early so we can recap all these games. But until then, we are out.